I was told I would be interviewed by 3 people at once, which is not that unusual. What they did not tell me was that they were going to have 6 other candidates in the room vying for one position. I did not walk out, but I did pull an interviewer aside and say I was no longer interested in the position. Story 1. I really wanted this job. I prepared for a week and a half for the interview. I went in and met with 2 people. It was going great. 45 minutes later, they told me that the position had already been filled, but they liked me enough for a position that was part-time and half the salary, which also meant no benefits. It was like going to a shoe store saying you need a 7.5 in black, and the guy comes back and says, "Yeah, we don't have a 7.5, but here's a 12 in green you can try." If the job is no longer available, delete it from your site. Don't play people and waste their time. Guess I'm still a little sore about this. Story 2. I was a crew chief in a warehouse at my previous job. The interviewer read this on my resume and thought it said crew chef and asked me if this was a joke. I politely corrected him and explained my previous position. He did not believe me but continued with the interview anyway. As the interview went on, I quickly realized that the interviewer was, in fact, one of the supervisors in this facility, and that not only did he fundamentally not understand the freight industry, but he could barely read or spell. I knew there was no way I could work under this guy, so I stood up, thanked him for his time, and left. He told me I was an idiot and was throwing away an incredible opportunity. I did not even turn around to acknowledge him. Felt like a bad comedy sketch. Story 3. A competitor was trying to hire me away from my bank. The head of research asked me what it would take to hire me away. I said, "A lot more money." He said, "I like to hire people who aren't motivated by money." I laughed and replied that I wasn't aware his bank was a charity, got up, and left. Story 4. Back when I was doing hourly work, I got a long voicemail from a retail store asking me to call them back to set up an interview. I called them back as soon as I could and explained to whoever was on the phone that I got a call about XYZ, and they transferred me to the manager. The manager gets on the phone and says, "Hi, thanks for calling me back. Just so you know, sweetie, it's incredibly rude not to ask for a person by name over the phone." I can't even recall if this person stated their name in the incredibly long voicemail I got. I stopped her there and said, "Sorry, I'm no longer interested in this position, bye." Story 5. I went into an interview with a company when I was in college because they got my name off Indeed. There was a room filled with 30 of us listening to what could only have been a multi-level marketing scheme. After 45 minutes of talking about how awesome the company is, how much fun they have, and how much money they make without any talk of what the actual job was, I stood up and was the first person to leave. About half of the room left with me. Story 6. Didn't even make it to the interview. I had applied for a marketing company through ZipRecruiter. Within 5 minutes, I had an email, text, call, and voicemail from the company. I had applied for this job while at work, so I had to wait a few minutes to sneak outside to call back. No answer, left a message. Sent an email, no response. Sent a text, no response. 2 days later, I received a call and email saying, "Hey, we haven't heard back. Please visit this link to schedule an interview." I clicked the link, and it has interview times from 9 to 1 every 30 minutes, and I can't leave for lunch until 1 at the earliest. Again, I called to see if I can schedule for 1:30, and no response. I just ended up scheduling an interview and not showing up. They actually called the next day to see if I forgot, and I told them my situation. The lady just said, "Oh, sorry, I haven't really checked my messages recently." And I just said, "Thanks, but no thanks." Story 7. I requested a raise and was invited to an interview. My duties at the company were progressively changing, and my tasks were becoming quite high tier. If I missed deadlines, it would have a small impact on the company's income. I didn't think it was fair to give me tasks with such responsibility without a raise. The interview was a train wreck. My boss's colleague kept walking on eggshells and avoided the subjects I brought up all the time. I got extremely fed up with it and walked out. I left my boss a 3.5-week notice and said I had made my decision to pursue other options. Story 8. I was invited to an interview through Monster for a job I hadn't applied for. I was desperate at the time and decided to give it a shot. I walked into a small commercial building, and there were 7 or 8 folding chairs in a small entrance area with a hallway and a couple of small offices attached. There were 5 older people, possibly in their mid-40s, while I was around 23 at the time, and they all had clipboards. A woman walked through the hall, greeted me, and handed me a clipboard to fill out the information. It was strange and asked for more personal and financial information than I was willing to offer. I stuck around anyway for the interview. The office was set up suspiciously, as if they had just thrown a painting on the wall and put a plant in the corner, and that was it. Finally, I sat down with the man interviewing me. He kept talking about this big opportunity and urged me to get in now while the opportunity was good. He never actually explained what the job was. I realized it was a pyramid scheme almost immediately. I stopped him mid-sentence and told him I appreciated his time, but I would have to decline. He was baffled. I then walked outside to the 5 or 6 people sitting there and told them all, while the man's door was still open, that it was a pyramid scheme and to take the sheets of paper they were filling out and rip them up or take them with them. They all looked, much like myself, desperate. I felt horrible for them. I didn't stick around to see if any of them left or not. It was totally sketchy. Thanks to the user who provided and reminded me of the company name, American Income Life. Story 9. I was interviewing for a software development job that I didn't apply for, but they contacted me. The job description was utterly ridiculous. It required proficiency in about 30 languages and technologies. The job also paid below entry level for my field, but demanded more than what a senior developer typically does. I didn't want the job, but I figured I'd interview for practice. I only matched 5 out of the 30 or so languages and technologies they wanted, but since they called me, I figured they saw something in my resume they liked. Well, I found out shortly into the interview that they actually did want everything on the list. The lady interviewing me was offended that I showed up to the interview without matching their qualifications. I politely reminded them that they contacted me, thanked them for their time, and left. The job was still open for another 2 years after that day. I hadn't checked after that, so who knows, maybe it's still open. Story 10. They demanded that I give them my social security number before I could be interviewed. I told them I would happily provide them with my social security number when I was hired. They wouldn't let me into the interview without it, so I just left. Story 11. Had an interview for a warehouse supervisor. Arrived a little early, and the front desk had me go over to the shipping department office and wait for the operations manager. I sat down by his office and overheard him having his meeting with other supervisors and leads. I heard screaming and the throwing of things. Constant degrading language. I left quickly. Story 12. I was contacted for an information technology position in a nearby town, put on the suit, and got there about 20 minutes early. There were 4 other people in the reception area. No worries, I was confident in my skills. Soon enough, I met with my interviewer. We went over my credentials and background, and I was asked career-relevant questions. Then, about 15 minutes into the interviewer said something which I found a little odd, so I asked for clarification. It was then that I was told it was for a sales job, specifically a cold-calling sales job. They started extolling the virtues of a career change. I said something along the lines of this not being the position I was led to believe and left the room. As I was leaving, one of the interviewers made a remark about me making a big mistake. I stopped in the lobby on the way out and made the general announcement that whatever job they were here to interview for, it's actually a cold call sales job. About 2/3 of the people in the room got up and left with me, and I got a bunch of glares from the workers there. When I got back outside, I parked my car near the entrance and told anyone who looked like they were going in for an interview that it was a cold sales job. I was there for about 45 minutes before a police car rolled up and had me move along. One of the people in the office heard what I was doing and called them. Story 13. The pay. They needed a ton of references and multiple interviews. In the end, she goes, "So the starting wage is the minimum wage." I said, "Well, your ad said $20 per hour?" She said, "That's after 15 years. I promptly walked out. Story 14. I realized I was way out of my depth. The job was in my field at a salary that would be sensible for my level of experience and qualification, and the job advertisement was pretty standard for what I do. Through the interview, it became clear that they were actually looking for someone to do some very advanced modeling as well as effectively replace the chief financial officer who was retiring. I told them quite bluntly that I could probably learn the modeling, but I wouldn't be able to hit the ground running, and elements of the chief financial officer role would have to be outsourced by law if they hired me, as I wasn't qualified enough to carry them out. While I'd possibly consider the job on those conditions, the salary they're offering for the expertise and experience they needed was at least 50% too low. They looked a bit shocked, so I just said, also, I'm not very good at playing the corporate game. I say what I think, which is a very useful thing for advising the executive level because I don't have an agenda and I don't play politics. I just wanted to put my cards on the table, so we don't waste each other's time. At that point, one of them got really angry, red in the face and raised voice, so I stood up, thanked them for their time, and started walking out. He actually tried to stop me from getting out the door because you don't walk away from me, but I just laughed, and his colleague pulled him away. One of the more interesting interviews I've had. Story 15. They called the police on the guy who was waiting to interview after me. He was just a Native American man sitting in this hotel lobby. The job was at a hotel. The person interviewing me saw him, brought me into his office, and then called the police and said there was a homeless man who wouldn't leave the lobby. I tried to explain that I had talked to him and that he was also applying for the job, but he didn't care. I just said, "Wow, I don't want to work for a place like this," and left. He seemed genuinely stunned and angry that I walked out. Story 16. When I was in high school, the White Castle down the street was hiring. I lived in a bad area, and it was open 24/7. I went in and applied, but let them know that I was in school and couldn't do overnights because of that and because of the area. They assured me that this was fine and that they could get me in after school and out before midnight. I go in for an interview and orientation on a Tuesday afternoon around 6, and they've got the schedule set. I'm on after orientation, 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. or something like that. So I pull the shift lead aside and say, "Hey, I was told that because of my school situation, I wouldn't be on overnights. I'm on the schedule for overnight tonight. I have school tomorrow, and I wasn't even aware I'd have a shift today. I was told it was just orientation. How do we fix this?" She goes, "Well, everybody has to work overnight. It is what it is." I went, "Gotcha. Thanks for your time," took off the apron, handed it to her, and left her and the rest of the orientation group, who were stunned. Story 17. I had an interview last year for a teaching gig. The principal in charge of the interview was an hour late. That alone irritated me, but he showed up and we started the interview. 5 minutes in, he says, "Hey, let's walk around the campus. I'll show you around." That wasn't a big deal, we just walked and talked. The problem is that every time he saw someone, he'd stop and spend at least 5 minutes talking to them, regardless of whether or not I was done answering questions. I was there 2.5 hours for that interview. I said no. Story 18. I applied for a middle school science teacher position in a challenging inner-city school district. I sat down in the principal's office, and she had my resume, application, and all my supplemental paperwork in a folder. When I walked in, she closed the folder, moved it to the side, and said, "I'm sure you're very qualified. I haven't even read through this. I'm going to offer you this position on the spot because you're male and over 6 feet tall. I don't need a teacher. I need someone to control the kids in the classroom. Will you take the job?" I thanked her for her time and couldn't get out of there fast enough. Story 19. I went to an interview and was ushered into an office that clearly did not belong to the interviewer in the ill-fitting suit. After a few minutes, it became clear that this marketing job was actually a sales role. As a marketing graduate who specializes in analytics, I wish people would stop listing sales jobs as marketing positions. Story 20. I never actually made it to the interview, but I'll tell the story anyway. I was a student applying for a placement in a financial role at an engineering company. The application clearly stated that I would be working at a local site about 5 minutes from my home. I got through all the preliminary steps, competency tests, online interviews, etc., and was asked to attend an assessment center. I was completely fine with that until they told me it would take place in 2 days, nearly 200 miles away from where I live, starting at 8 in the morning. I contacted them, and they were willing to compensate me for my travel and accommodation, a total of £53. The train tickets alone were nearly £200, and the closest available accommodation at short notice was 7 miles away. The even more ridiculous thing was that they said this was the first of multiple assessment centers they would require me to attend. Naturally, I didn't need to use my economics degree to figure out that spending hundreds of pounds on the chance of a placement was a bad investment, so I didn't attend. Story 21. The position had been advertised as a $7 per hour waitressing job, which would be absolutely stunning due to 99% of serving jobs being $2 an hour. I drove 45 minutes. Halfway through the interview, I asked about the pay since it was unusual for a restaurant to not try to pay the absolute minimum. I was expecting to hear that maybe they didn't do tipping or that they just felt strongly about making changes to serving culture or something. Oh no, it's the $2 per hour, obviously. But, oh, the ad said $7. He rolled his eyes, then goes, well, yeah, you're going to make $7 after tips. He knew full well what it looked like in the ad to say it was $7 per hour. I was disgusted, got up, and left. $2 per hour I can deal with. Tricking people into applying by making it look way better than it is? No bueno. Edit because everyone outside of the United States is freaking out about the $2 thing. In the United States, waitstaff is paid at an hourly rate of $2. The expectation is that they will reach the federal minimum wage level with tips, and if they do not, the restaurant is supposed to pay the difference. Spoiler, often it's more likely that they'll just cut your hours to nothing until you quit. To be fair, I should point out that for most servers, they make far above minimum wage and more than cooks after tips. On an exceptionally good night, I have made $300. Most of the time, I'd guess it averages $20 per hour. This was asked a lot. I'm from Michigan. This experience was in circa 2004. A tipped employee engages in an occupation in which he or she customarily and regularly receives more than $30 per month in tips. An employer of a tipped employee is only required to pay $2.13 per hour in direct wages if that amount combined with the tips received at least equals the federal minimum wage. If the employee's tips combined with the employer's direct wages of at least $2.13 per hour do not equal the federal minimum hourly wage, the employer must make up the difference. Many states, however, require higher direct wage amounts for tipped employees. Also, if you think that's terrible, I once briefly worked as an Outback Steakhouse takeout server. You still only make $2 per hour, but nobody tips you ever because they think you're not a real server. I'm not saying we were the same as a server, but we did make all salads, prep soups and sides, etc. We were in the kitchen more than the servers and did a lot of running to keep up with all the orders. Again, not comparing this to servers. Just saying that we didn't just stand there and hand you a bag. Just for context, I want to make it very clear that I'm not defending this model or anything. I'm just saying this is what it was and is from my experience. Personally, I just feel like the system is always going to find some way to screw over waitstaff no matter what happens with wage adjustments. But I'm sure that's a fatalistic view. I'm glad it's better elsewhere.